Hi guys, today we're quickly going to look at petrol consumption. This is going to be something that's linked to rate or rates, and it's also linked to maps and measurement and those kind of things. So alright, what we need to be able to do, there's basically three types of questions that we can ask you. The first one is to use the rate for calculations. So the rate to the petrol consumption rates can be given as liters per kilometer, liter per 100 kilometers, or then we can use the rate to plan a trip. So for instance, how far can we drive with one tank of petrol? How many stops must we make on a trip? And how many tanks of fuel are we going to need? Then we can also ask you to use this petrol consumption rate to perform calculations with cost. So normally what's given to you then is the petrol price, and you will need to perform calculations to calculate the price or the cost of certain. So if we just look at an example of this, just to show you again how important this is in real life. If we have a look at something like this, it tells us it has a tank capacity of 45 liters, which in other words means if you fill up this tank with petrol, it's going to be 45 liters. Then it also tells you it's got an average mileage of between 16,47 to 17,2 kilometers per liter. So remember, what we need to keep in mind is that the petrol consumption can change depending on the conditions that you are driving in. So if you are in traffic, if you are on a national road, so on a freeway, if you're driving in a suburban place, what the load is in your car, and all of those kind of things. So if we now at something like this, it says the automatic 1.0 liter, and then it continues giving us lots of information, but it now tells us that it has a petrol consumption as 5.2 liters per 100 kilometers, and then someone said when they actually test drove the car, they ended up getting a petrol consumption of 7.1 liters per 100 kilometers. Note that the distance stayed the same, but in the second case, they actually used a lot more petrol or a lot more fuel. So, if we look at something like this, we need to remember that petrol is something that's always going to be asked in terms of this. Here we can see the price in June 2020, and then the expected price in July 2020. So this is 95 petrol. Then you can also see diesel over here. So we always give you the petrol price, and then we can ask you questions regarding cost where you have to use this. In other words, some of the words that have come up so far is we spoke about the capacity of a tank, and this is when we know how much petrol or how much fuel it can hold. We've spoken about consumption, and when we spoke about consumption, we spoke about how much of the fuel it's using for a certain distance. And then we spoke about the cost, which is going to use the price per liter, and that's going to ask us to calculate the cost. If we start looking at some calculations, let's read the question. If we look at what is important, I would say the 65 liters is important, and the consumption rate of 11 kilometers per liter will be important. So, how much petrol would 2.5 tanks of petrol be? So one tank was 65 liters, so therefore 2.5 times 65 gives me 162.5 liters. Question B, if the car travels at the average consumption rate, so that means we can actually use the 11 kilometers per liter, how far can the car drive on one tank of petrol? So we know that one tank of petrol is 65 liters. So 65 times 11 gives us 715 kilometers of traveling with one tank of petrol. If we look at question C, if petrol costs 12 Rand 71 cents per liter, what would the cost be of filling one tank? So in other words, in this case, what's important is the price per liter, and also the fact that they're asking us about one tank. So 12,71 times 65 gives me 826 rands and 15 cents. If we now look at another example, you'll see here that I got this information about the Toyota Aygo, which is a type of car. It gives us the engine size. Here it gives us the average petrol consumption, which is now in liters per 100 kilometers. It gives me the fuel range, and it again gives me the fuel tank capacity. So what would the fuel consumption per kilometer be? So we have the fuel consumption as 4,3 liters per 100 kilometer. So if we divide that by 100, we get 0,043 liters per kilometer. The next question is a more intricate type question. Show through calculation how the fuel range was calculated. So fuel range is what we find over here. So now, if you remember when we first started with conversions, there was a lesson on using the magic method. So the information given to us was 4,3 liters is 100 kilometers. Now we need to know how they actually got to 814 kilometers. So we know that the tank has a capacity of 35 liters. So we put liters by liters, and we put kilometers by kilometers. Now remember, the magic method is divide up times across, and that gives us 813,9534844 kilometers, which we then can round off to 814 kilometers. If we look at another question using exactly the same vehicle, would a petrol consumption of 5,5 liters per 100 kilometers be more economic? So they're asking us if this is better than this. And if we have a look at this, the answer would be no, it's not more economic, because you're going to be using more petrol or more fuel, and therefore it's going to end up costing you more money. If the driver plans to drive 2,500 kilometers in 1 month, will they need more than 3 full tanks of petrol? So now we know that 1 full tank is 35 liters, or we know that the fuel range is 814 kilometers. So if I take the full distance they want to travel, divide by the fuel range, so 1 tank of petrol, it gives me 3,071 tanks, which is barely more than 3, but the question asked if they need more than 3. So the answer is therefore yes, they would need more than 3 full tanks. Another example with the same vehicle, and they ask us if the total kilometers driven for May is 759 and the petrol price is R12.44 per liters, what is the fuel cost for that month? So we're going to use magic method again. 4,3 liters is 100 kilometers. So underneath kilometers, we'll put the 759 kilometers and a question mark over there. Now you guys know it's going to be divide up, multiply across, and that gives me 32,637 liters. And if I multiply that with the petrol price, I end up with a total cost of 406,00428, which we know we can round off to 406 rands. We just have a look. Some questions they can also ask you is how often you need to stop during a journey. So remember, if it's long distance travel, Arrive Alive would actually prefer if you stop after every 2 hours of driving or every 200 kilometers. It also depends, obviously, if you're driving with pets or with children in your car. It can also depend on whether how often you need to refuel or how often you need to stop to go for a bathroom break or to eat something. And then something else that you'll need to remember that you need to be able to do is to calculate running costs of cars. So for that, you can use the Automobile Association or the AA. They've got quite a nifty table that you can use. And this is also something that you need to be able to do.